for authors, filmmakers, entertainment, and all your listening needs. Listen now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Robert Forman. We're going to be talking about his most recent book, Enlightenment, Ain't What It's Cracked Up to Be. And if you'd like to learn more about Robert and his books and his other materials, you can go to www.enlightenment.com. Well, actually, that's enlightenment.aint.com. I'm sorry. I almost told you folks wrong. And you can also find it linked on his picture as well as below his picture. And you can also find below his description a link to Amazon where you can pick up his book there. And if anybody's interested in calling in, the number's, pardon me, folks, 832-632-7904. And Robert, how are you doing today?
Well, Royce, I'm doing very well. It's a real delight to be here. We had to put this off a while, and now I'm thrilled to get a chance to actually have this conversation. So welcome back for you.
Well, thank you. I really do appreciate that. I want to thank you for bearing with me when I was in the hospital there. I think I mentioned to you earlier, it's been a recurring theme for me. It's going to probably continue to be a recurring theme, so I'm trying to work around that. But at the same time, I have been really looking forward to this here interview, especially with the title of your book, Enlightenment Ain't What It's Cracked Up to Be, because I find myself having to ask, what could he possibly mean by that? I mean, because most people would think it's a positive thing.
I think of enlightenment as a very positive thing myself. But when I say it ain't what it's cracked up to be, there's an awful lot of hype about what enlightenment will be like, about what comes from the spiritual path, about what we will, what kind of changes we'll experience, what we'll get from the whole thing. And in a very surprising set of changes after about 2.5 years of daily practice of meditation, I did shift into a very different way to be. It took me a long time to realize that what had happened to me was enlightenment. And I can tell you the story of how I came to that recognition. But I didn't recognize it because my life didn't get a whole lot better. There were certain profound differences in what was going on, but it didn't make my life perfect. It didn't make my relationships fly. It didn't make me happy. It didn't make me healthy, wealthy, and wise. All the stuff that I thought was sort of going to automatically come when you practice spirituality or when you've gone through these kinds of changes. Frankly, none of it came, Royce, and so it took me a long time to realize how profound the misunderstanding of enlightenment, of the shifts into higher states of consciousness. I think that we in the West and probably in the East, I think, have a very inflated view of what's going to happen from all this. So the title of the book is designed not to say enlightenment's going to be lousy or it's nothing to it, but rather it's not what it's cracked up to be.
It's not all the hype, in other words. So, but what I'm hearing from you is that although it's not all it's cracked up to be and none of this other stuff you expected actually took place, the whole time something actually did take place in the background, but you just wasn't aware of it, didn't pick up on it till later.
Almost. Well, I'll tell you the story very briefly.
Okay.
I was in a long course of meditation. I was on a 9-month retreat, and after about 2-3 months, I started to notice these shifts going on in the back of my head, as if little tubes or something. And all of a sudden, one of them would just go, and then it was like it zipped off. And in that area, a very tiny area, probably in retrospect, probably some sort of neural pathway or something, it just zips off. And in that area, what had been kind of active and noisy and as if full of static became completely silent. And that never shifted back. And then a few days later, the next tube over to the right went and shifted off. And then that was completely silent. And the two tubes as if became one larger silent area. And after about I don't know, every 3 or 4 days, one of these little tubes would just go and zip itself off. And then little by little, the back of my head, and in fact the back of my mind, was becoming sort of a third silent, a half silent. And finally, the last one to the right zipped off. And there were some very noticeable changes. The background of my thoughts, the kind of constant chatter that goes on in the mind, shut itself off. My breathing changed. I found myself witnessing everything in a way that I'd heard about but never experienced. So I definitely noticed the changes. But I thought those changes were going to have a profound and rich effect on my life. And frankly, they didn't. The anxieties that I felt, the depression I was still struggling with, all of that stuff stayed with me for a very long time. And so I definitely noticed some changes, but I didn't recognize them as the Hindu term moksha. I didn't recognize them as enlightenment until many, many years later when I was in graduate school and I started to read about this stuff in text after text.
Okay. Now I'm taking it though, the experience you was having is what really motivated you to write this book, so that you could help others to understand better what to look for and what not to give up when they don't experience and that sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely. And I wanted to help people kind of see that. But I also, this happened to me when I was a very young man. I was only 24 years old when this happened, surprisingly early. And in the course of my life, I'm now 66, so it was some 42 years ago. In the course of my life, with this silence in the back of my life, I continued to ask myself the question, well, if enlightenment ain't given me what I want it to be, that is to say, if enlightenment isn't giving me the kind of rich life, the real satisfaction I was hoping for, well, goodness, what would? And so the rest of my life and this book is a kind of exploration of how do you find satisfaction in the life? How do you gain the kind of life that we all set out to get when we were starting these paths? What is it that is really of value? And that's really where I tend to focus. And that continues to be my work now, and I'd love to talk about that. But keep going with your thought.
Well, actually, my thought was going in that direction. My next question to you was going to be, do you know what it would take to satisfy you, which I think is going right where you were talking about.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Yeah, well, here I'm about to get a little plug in, Roy, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But some colleagues of mine and I have said to ourselves, look, the spiritual life as it's come to us from India and frankly from Christianity hasn't really produced people that are deeply happy. So what would? What's going to make our lives and our relationships really rich? And so we have worked for a long time. It took us about 6 or 7 years to develop a program that was able to apply the good parts about the spiritual life to our everyday lives. And what I think is the most important thing is that your relationships, your connections with people become as open as your soul can be in the deepest time of meditation, in the deepest time of your spiritual life. So that for me, what I'm interested in, and I think, frankly, what most people are interested in, is to create a life in which you have deep and real connections with people, in which you can create honest, open explorations together, in which you can touch one another soul to soul. And so because of that name, we call the program Soul Jazz that we've developed. And Soul Jazz has a website, souljazzonline.com, that sort of explains this to folks. But it's really a program that's designed to help people bring the depths of their lives into their relationships and into their contacts with one another. And frankly, Royce, I can't think of anything that is more satisfying, that is richer and more humanly fulfilling. And it's something that I'm totally in love with this process right now. So thank you for giving me a chance to say that.
Oh, well, thank you. But matter of fact, what I'm hearing here is you actually did find this here happiness and satisfaction you were looking for.
I have to say that in the course of time, and I'd say this has really been, the Soul Jazz program has been coming up for the last 15 years between my colleagues for my colleagues and I. But I think what creates a life of satisfaction, and I think what has given me more satisfaction, is being able to share, whether I'm in a good space or a struggling space, with other people that are also sharing back with me. I mean, you want to share your life and you want to share your process with people that you can trust. And I think that that's very important to be able to discern that. And so the Soul Jazz program talks some about that. But yes, I would say I have learned how to share with people in a way that I no longer feel alone. I no longer feel like the struggles that I'm going through are only my struggles. I find that being able to share this with my colleagues and with a few friends is just so enriching and so much better. I think I struggled, and I think a lot of people struggle with, I was very successful, I was very busy, I was very much in the world, earning a living and building a career. To some extent, you do that kind of alone, and the struggles that we have are sort of alone. And it took me a long time, and with my colleagues and I think we've all learned how to do this better and better. It took me a long time to learn what it is to really share with another human being.
It's interesting you should say that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that there's nothing that I find more satisfying than being able to do that. It means that you just feel like you're walking through this tsunami that is life, holding a few hands. And I think that that's just such a gift to me. Yeah.
But no, I was listening to you. I was thinking about the fact that I know that I've seen different groups of people that one would say, well, that's a private issue. You don't share that with the world. As a matter of fact, a lot of my family was like that. Mm-hmm. And then there's another group of people that you'll hear them all the time say, you're not in this alone. We're all together. This is one big world. It leads me to ask that when a person experiences what you said about feeling that this has to be alone, do you really have to be alone, or have you convinced yourself you have to be alone?
Yeah, I think so. And I think all of us grow up thinking we have to keep things private, we have to keep things hidden. I know so many people whose families have an alcoholic, and that was never to be talked about, or who, there was some abuse in my own family, there was some abuse, that's never to be talked about. And there's so much that's private, and I think that instinct to keep it all under the rug, to keep it all close to the chest, I think, Royce, does us a lot of harm. And I think that the more I have been able to allow my truth out, the more I've been able to share with others in a way that is open and without any defensiveness, I think life becomes more and more open. The connection here, I want to make a link here for you.
Okay.
The connection for me is this, between what I found out about enlightenment and this relationship stuff. The experience of enlightenment, I think one of the, as it were, feeling qualities of enlightenment is that there's an aspect of yourself inside that is wide open, and it takes no effort to be in it. There was a side of my life when this silence came on. It was as if there was a piece in my life that was like an ice rink where you could just go and go and go without any work at all. And my relationships were almost exactly the opposite, which was, don't say this, don't say this, don't say this. And over time, my goal has been to allow my relationships to be as effortless and open, as undefended and unblocked as the silence itself within became for me. And so that when I have something that I have to keep secret, when I have something that I'm ashamed of, when I have something inside that I can't tell you, I can't tell anyone this, it causes me to kind of be blocked off, as if I've put a big wall up in front of the flowing river. And as soon as I let go of what I feel I can't share with you, with another person, as soon as I let go of that, I become more open, I become freer, and I become as open as the silence of enlightenment itself. And so that I want to say that to be in a relationship in which there are no defenses and no blockedness is the same quality as to be in the silence that is the permanent aspect of the experience of enlightenment. So that's kind of how I connect these two dots, that effortlessness that can come in relationship precisely matches the effortlessness that befell me when I was 24.
I think you make a lot of sense, to be honest with you, Robert. I know that in my own personal experience, I grew up in a Christian home, and, I got to hear a lot of times, well, this is a private matter. This is not the sort of thing we talk about. Put your best foot forward. Don't, better let people think you're stupid than open your big mouth and remove all doubt. And I'm pretty sure you've heard quite a few yourself.
Absolutely.
But,
I grew up Jewish, and we have our share. Go ahead.
But yeah, when I grew up, even when I was a kid, I never listened to that. I always thought it was, stupid. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. How can I have anybody like me for being me if they don't get to see me? In other words.
Right. That sentence, Royce, goes so deep. And the interesting thing for me is that, yes, I want others to see me. But to some extent, I'm still discovering how I feel, who I am, what I think. And if I can be discovering out loud who I am, what I feel, how I really am in the world, what I'm doing, what kind of impact I'm having on my children or on my friends, if I can discover more of that out loud with you, well, there's a huge gift in that. I'm sharing it with you. We're becoming more deeply connected, but I'm also learning more about who I am. So it's not like I share with you what I am. Rather, I share with people what I am and what I know of what I am, and I also get to keep learning and growing and discovering more about who I am and what I am. So it's more a verb than a noun. It's sharing with another human being in this way is a possibility of continuing to learn and continuing to unpack and reveal what I'm about. And I think that's where the fun is, to really keep going and going and going. Yeah.
Because I think one thing when you do this, you begin to learn a new side of yourself that even you weren't aware of. And then you get to learn a new side about others that they weren't aware of. With any luck, they'll be learning a new side of themselves as well.
Yeah, and you want to pick out people that can do that with you. And there's nothing quite like it. And that's why the program, by the way, is called Soul Jazz. Because, in jazz, I play a riff, and then you go, oh, that's cool. I'm going to play a riff and respond. And then you play your riff, and I go, oh, man, that's really neat. And I play my sound. And then you go your sound, and I go my sound. And when you're doing this with what you're discovering about who you are, like I remember a conversation I had with a friend of mine, a fellow named Carrie Gordon, and we got to talking about our relationships with our siblings. And, I love my sister. I think she's a great person, and we had a good time. But we started talking about what some of the feelings were about our relationships with our sisters. We both had sisters. And lo and behold, he started saying, and I said, oh, my goodness, I feel the same way. I didn't realize that. And he said, and then I talked about that. He said, well, that kind of gets me to think about this. And so, and he would say that, and it would get me going on this other thing. And lo and behold, we're sort of discovering what we each felt. It was very similar and very different. And yet we were discovering it out loud together. And I think, Royce, that is conversations like that, and I've been privileged to have more than a few, conversations like that are opportunities to become more richly human out loud together, and in the process to create real, ongoing, and juicy connections with other people.
Juicy connections. Now, there's an interesting term.
Well, you know what I mean? It's like you're talking about stuff, and it can be funny, it's alive, but mostly it's got the juice of life to it. I think that's where it's really cool. Yeah, I think the word juicy works pretty well out there.
Now, this website you're talking about is souljazzrecords.uco.uk.
Oh, I see. No, not even close. Soul Jazz Online. So the program is called Soul Jazz. Soul Jazz Online, because we do teach it online.com. It's that simple. So thanks for asking that again.
Yeah, I'm trying to actually go to it while I'm listening to you talk so that I can paste it in the chat room.
Soul Jazz Online. Mm-hmm.
I put souljazz.com, studied, showed, Soul Jazz online, and phew, got a little tongue-tied there.
Yeah.
I'm here now. Looks like you got courses, blogs, forum, resources, contact us, webinars, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, we have a webinar that actually we're running another beta test starting in May, and that webinar has been very surprising to me. You know how you do these conversations with people, they could be anywhere, and that's a real resource of our modern technology. Well, these webinars allow you to talk to people, and the next webinar we've got somebody from Israel, from Sweden, probably from Denmark, a couple of people from New York, one from California, and so we'll all be meeting online, and we'll be able to see each other and talk to each other one by one. And yeah, I think I'm thrilled with this modern technology. It's really, really something. And so it means that people don't have to travel to do these kinds of things anymore, and I think it's a real gift to us.
Now, you say you and a partner run this website?
Yes, I have a psychotherapist. Well, first of all, be aware that the program was developed by about a dozen of us, and we're all spiritual teachers, psychologists, writers. I mean, it's a really good group. And then it's been refined by this partner of mine, a guy named Kerry Gordon that I mentioned before, and he's a psychotherapist up in Toronto, very good psychotherapist. His practice is booming, and he's been just terrific to work with. I really love the guy, and it's been a real treat. So, yes, we do it together. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you mentioned before that you're all spiritual teachers, and while you're a spiritual teacher, you had a bout with depression. Was that before you became a spiritual teacher, or do spiritual teachers have bouts with depression as well?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I think the answer to the second question is, of course, spiritual teachers and psychologists and psychotherapists, of course, can have bouts of depression. My depression started when I was in college, and I was very severely depressed for about 3 years. You know, and I had what's called suicidal ideation, and I was really in trouble. And the interesting thing about depression for me is that depression, when you have been something, like for me, I was this sort of chipper, happy-go-lucky, kind of, friendly, but not particularly intimate kid. And that personality, for me, was sort of fading away when I got into college. But I didn't know who I was yet. I didn't know what to become. And so the depression was a kind of expression of the bottom of a U for me. So I was one kind of thing, and I went down and down and down and kind of dropped off.
Sounds almost like you perceived yourself on a subconscious level as ceasing to exist.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. Yeah, that's a very good phrase. Now, when you've been depressed like that, and 3 years is a long time to be depressed, it never quite leaves. I consider the melancholy that I carry after that one of my best friends. It allows me to kind of connect to people when they are in pain. It reminds me of what life contains, both good and bad. And so that I feel one of the things I like about who I am now is that when I'm happy, I never quite forget sadness. And when I'm sad, I never quite forget that I've been happy. And so that having that kind of rich emotional life allows you to connect with people wherever they are more. And I think that's played into the creation of the Soul Jazz program for me, because it's like I want to be able to talk about things that are not working. I want to be able to talk about my depression when it comes up, and I every now and again I do go into the dumps, not for long these days, I'm happy to say. But I want to invite people to be able to go there with one another and to be able to go to both what makes them sad or depressed and what makes them happy and feel very satisfied with their lives. And I think if people don't have both sides of that, if people can't touch into the part of their lives that makes us feel down in the dumps, I think people are losing a very great deal. And so for me, I consider my depression is still one of my best friends.
Well, I have talked to some people that would swear to me that they could not put their finger on it, but they just felt depressed and felt like they were spiraling, and to them for no apparent reason. Do you have any idea how this happens?
Oh, that they become depressed but don't know why?
Well, depressed without no apparent reason, at least none that they can figure out.
Well, I didn't know. I didn't understand the reason when I was depressed in college. When I was depressed back when I was in college age, I had no idea what was going on. All I knew was I was really feeling crappy.
So it's really pretty common.
So when I described this being at the bottom of a U, oh my goodness, it took me 15, 20 years before I began to see what had happened there. So no, you don't know this when you're depressed. All you know when you're really depressed, and I say this from personal experience, all you know when you're really depressed is that you've always been depressed and you'll never be anything other than depressed. That's the hard part about it, that you can't remember being anything else. And so that, you have no idea why you're in it. And this business about losing one persona, one personality, and not having discovered who I was yet, that's something, oh my goodness, it took me many, many years before I had that insight. So, I think depression, we never know quite why we're getting depressed. But I think in retrospect, I would say most people that I see that are depressed are going through a major personality change but don't quite know where it's going yet. I think that's really kind of what causes this. But that's my particular view, and I'm not, I'm more a spiritual teacher than a psychologist in that way. So I think it's a spiritual life. Depression comes when we are letting go of something major, and we haven't discovered what's on the other side of that letting go yet. So I consider depression, in the long run, healthy, in the short run, terrifying.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the fact that I think sometimes a lot of it simply goes back to an emptiness inside of you, something that you need to fulfill that you may not even know what it is you need to fulfill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and that somehow getting filled. For me, I mean, we started out this conversation talking about making connections with others. And I think, Royce, it breaks my heart that I think extremely few people have what I consider to be ongoing, deep connections with other human beings. I mean, we're all married and we have sex and whatnot, but excuse me, we're not all married, but many of us are married and we have one connection that's pretty good, and many of us have a pretty good relationship with our spouse, but very few people have much more than that. So that even at best, people have one, maybe two people they can really talk to. And that breaks my heart. I think that one of the hugest gifts I know in being alive is being able to share deeply about who I am and what's going on. And I think if we're able to tell the real truth to a trusted friend, we can make honest, intimate, soul-to-soul contact with other human beings. And I don't know anything that's more satisfying. So that I think that this longing that people have, I think there's a longing to make contact with themselves, with other human beings, with God. I think it's all connected.
Well, I think you hit on a major key. I mean, I'm no spiritual teacher and I'm no psychologist, but I'm a down-home old redneck country boy that was raised in the city. And I kind of got one of those kind of outlook perspectives about me when I'm listening to people talk. And a lot of what I'm getting out of this here, though, is that, when you're suppressed as a child, not being allowed to talk about things like this that are important to you, you're forced into building a mask of an image that keeps anybody from getting to know you, and therefore they can only know this image, and that creates a bridge, a wedge that comes in between you and everybody else. And then when you get older, even if you do want to break that, you have to get past that false persona, and you have to actually gain the courage to, take your mask off, which kind of lends a lot to the problem. I mean, what do you think?
First of all, I think you have put that so well I could kiss you. That's the first thing. Yes, we all have to wear a persona. Carl Jung, the psychologist, called those, we all have to wear masks. Carl Jung called those a persona. In other words, a kind of personality mask that we put on. And yes, it is hard to take it off. We learn it as kids. We're trained into all this stuff. But once we start taking it off, and once we start opening up our hearts to ourselves, most of all, but then to a few trusted other people, it means that we're not so alone and we're not living in falsehood. I think telling the truth about what really goes on in you, telling the truth to somebody that is that deserves being talked to in this way and can share back with you. It is the sad...
Without belittling you.
Oh, I wouldn't talk to somebody unless they were willing to do the same thing with themselves. When I start talking about where I'm struggling, if somebody doesn't talk back to me about where they've struggled or where they're working on stuff, that conversation's not going to go very far. You can't keep sharing with somebody like that. So belittling, yes, but I think that I don't even want somebody that's just listening to me. I want to do this with others in a way that's joint and a kind of co-growing process, a co-discovering process. There's something out in the world called co-counseling, which is sort of like this, but that's a little more formal. But what I'm looking for is I'm looking for other human beings I could just talk with and share with and do soul jazz with. In other words, really kind of do a riff that is going to stimulate you to discover more about who you are, and then you'll stimulate me. So yeah, man, I think that this, I mean, it's an interesting phrase, this redneck phrase. It's not something I use for myself, but I just love it. Yeah, you get trained into being that. You get trained into being this sort of character. And we all do. I mean, I was a Jewish guy, and that was part of my character, and that was part of my picture. And it takes a long time to let this stuff go, but it really is a process of kind of digging and discovering and revealing, and I just think this is just what makes life rich and worth living.
Well, me personally, I chose this redneck deal, actually using it for a handle on the radio because, well, you can see I got that deep Southern accent and sound kind of hillbilly and yokel, and I kind of use it as a gimmick. But
I think it's great.
I kind of also, though, do it personality-wise because most of the redneck people I've ever known were just good old boys. They were laid back. They were as honest as you could be. They were real, good about welcoming people and, just seemed like my kind of personality anyway. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the redneck kind of persona that you're talking about, I find it quite charming, frankly. I mean, I don't live in Texas. I don't know much about it. There are no rednecks in New York City, frankly. I don't know. Anybody that comes as a redneck in New York City is going to be considered a real crazy person here. So it's like we don't do that here. But nevertheless, we all have these kind of personas, and I think it's the challenge of life is to recognize where we're enacting a mask, as you put it, and where we are living who we actually are. Well, and I think that the hard part is to do that more and more. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, don't you think, though, the key factor is that really wearing the mask is not what the harmful thing is. It's when you wear a mask to cover something you're ashamed of that it becomes like a trap for you.
I want to go deeper than that. I want to say yes, when you're wearing it in order to cover up something, of course, I think that's where it gets really dangerous. But I think all of us are doing that. And we're doing it consciously, and mostly we're doing it unconsciously. Like, what is it that I was covering up when I was a kid? What is it I couldn't say to myself when I was a kid? It took me many, many years to unpack that. And I'm still discovering, where I'm not being honest with myself and where I'm sort of screwing myself up. And I think this stuff is subtler than just you're consciously covering up something. I can say, and this, I'm not just pointing to you, Royce, not at all. I think we all do this. We live those masks, and they're largely unconscious, and the challenge is to become more and more and more cognizant of where you are and what you're doing, and also what you're not exposing to the world, what you're not sharing with others. So I think this is very subtle stuff, and it goes on and on. I don't think we ever get 100% clean from all this. I think we continue to learn until the day we die about who we are and what we're doing and what's laying on the world, and this is life work.
Yeah, but it sounds to me like if people got involved in more groups like Soul Jazz, they would have a better chance of getting to some of this unconscious material. Oh,
absolutely. And the more I do this with my colleagues and friends, the freer I get. And it goes on, and it's wonderful. It's just, you sort of discover, oh, I'm James Locke right there too, and oh, I went unconscious then, and oh, it's just, this is really where life gets to be more, I often feel like I'm living in a way that's kind of like I've been living on an ice rink. And I thought the walls of my ice rink were here, say 100 feet around me. And then I continue to talk to colleagues and friends, and I realize, oh my goodness, the walls are 150 feet. And after a while, oh, now I don't have to be worried about that when the walls are 200 feet, and I can open and open and open. And it's really a question of learning how to love, and learning how to love self, and learning how to love others, and make contact and connection, and be increasingly honest. And I think this is the fun stuff.
I know that for my particular case, I determined many, many years ago that I didn't want to be liked for being somebody that you wanted me to be, because then if I did that, you could not possibly like me. You could only like what I adjusted to your wants and desires, in other words. So I decided that I was going to just make my life an open book to everybody. The good, the bad, the ugly, you want to see it, you want to know about it, it's right there on public display. I'm not going to hide it. At least that way you're either going to hate me or can't stand me or have nothing to do with me, or you're going to genuinely like me. You know what I'm saying?
And then when I like you, I'm liking the real guy. I'm not liking some image of the guy.
Right. Now,
yeah,
there was
great.
a time that I would argue with you that I would never unconsciously hide anything. But I come to a point in my life one time when my dad told me that if I didn't learn to control my temper, I was going to injure myself. And I thought he was crazy, and I would have argued with him until the day I put my arm through a window. I learned on this here day not to be so sure of myself. So when you say today that I probably have things I'm unconsciously hiding, I'm not going to be as arrogant as I was when my dad warned me about my anger.
And that, my friend, is a redneck way to say that point. Putting your head through a window? Good grief, man. Did you really?
Yeah, my car window.
I love it. That's a redneck kind of discovery, I must say. I have never, ever put my hand through a car window. Or a regular window, for that matter.
Well, I can tell you, it hurts.
I'll keep that under advisement and not break any more windows.
But what I am saying, though, is that it does prove the point that you would never know what you're doing unconsciously. And the minute you start saying you wouldn't do it, you're getting off into dangerous ground, whether you know it or not.
Yeah, sure. And I can't tell you how many people have told me that, when they hit 50, they realize they've become more like their parents. Well, they were always like their parents. They just always denied that. Or, I used to vow I'd never be such and so with my kids. And then at some point I realized, oh my goodness, look what I'm doing. It's right there. And I wasn't you're not conscious of this stuff until you become conscious of it. It's that simple. But it's ongoing, this kind of self-revelation and discovery. I think it's one of the privileges of being alive. It's also ongoing that we realize, you realize how to run a good radio show, and it's ongoing that you continue to explore who you are, and this stuff is just, one of the privileges of being a human being is that we get to keep learning and we don't have to stop. And so I consider it one of the greatest gifts to me to be able to continue on this journey more and more and just continue to unpack. And that's, to some extent, that's the point of that book that you read, was that I'm continuing on my journey. And the journey is of self-discovery, and the journey is of becoming increasingly free. And Soul Jazz Online is designed to get people to be truly free within themselves and with one another. I think this is one of the gifts of being a human being, don't you think?
Yeah, what you're talking about is a spiritual teaching that all the best known, most accepted spiritual teachers have had since the early days of Egypt, going all the way back to Thoth, telling you to know yourself. The way Jesus put it was, seek ye the kingdom of heaven inside.
Yes.
But it's still knowing yourself.
Yeah, I think so. And the piece of that I want to add that the Soul Jazz program is doing is that to do this in dialogue, to do this with others that are themselves also learning in this way makes the whole path faster, and it makes the whole path a hell of a lot more fun. And it's a way to make contact with other human beings. So to know that I'm not alone in my struggles, to know that I am discovering out loud with others who are themselves discovering something often very similar. I think one of the things that I missed when I was very seriously on a meditative path is that though you meditate in groups of people that are also meditating, you're basically doing it alone. You've got your eyes closed, and you're on your path kind of by yourself, despite the fact you're surrounded with others. And the same is true, I think, in Christianity. When I go into a church, I close my eyes. I have a personal connection with Jesus or with God, and it's relatively solitary. In other words, me and God. Whereas I think that what I have come to really love and need is to be able to say, and I can do this really, really with other people. And that's just a treat all in itself. So that's what I want to add to know thyself. I want to say, know thyself, tell the real truth about who you are, and do it with others.
Now, if people was to do that, in my opinion, this world would be a much, much, much better place.
Yeah, in my opinion, too. Who knew?
And see, one of the things I like about doing this show is that I get to talk to really interesting people about you, about some of these subjects that's been important to me for years. Maybe you wouldn't expect it from a redneck, so to speak, but even some of us will study spiritual matters, even though we're not a spiritual teacher. Anybody in any walk of life can have an interest in any one given topic, in other words. But yeah, I get a chance to talk to, folks like you. You're very interesting. You're very knowledgeable, and interesting points come up, and you begin to see things in a different light than what you saw them before, and therein lies the payoff.
Yeah, and I think, when you kind of get back to it, all we really have is each other. All we really have to learn is what wise people have said over there and what this guy over here says, and I think that the possibility of doing this in a way that's increasingly open and honest, that encourages people to do this in a way that's really kind of digging into what's going on in life in a way that they may not have before. I think I agree that's one of the privileges that we get to have. And I can see how doing this radio show and continuing your conversations with people, you must always be sort of discovering aloud with folks and whatnot. So, I admire what you do, Royce. I think that carrying on a show like this, I know how difficult it is, and I think that you do it well, and you get to learn, but you're also giving a gift in that process.
Yeah, you're also getting to make friends in the process.
Yeah, and you get to make friends, and you get to discover a little more about who you are, and you get to see things in new ways. I think what a treat. But you also are giving it to other people. I feel the same way about my own work, which is...
Yeah, I was about to say, in your work...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, in your work, you get a chance on introspection that few others ever get.
Yeah, that's... it's been interesting. This all started when I went off on a 9-month meditation retreat. Not many people have had that privilege. And then I got a Ph.D. in comparative religions, and again, it's almost a monkish life. You're very much alone in the library, Carol. And you get to read and sort of have dialogue with other students, but mostly you get to have dialogue with the great minds of history. And so, but again, it's done kind of alone. So I have been very, I would say ruminative. I tend to be a very ruminative fellow, and that's been one of the joys of my life, but also one of the drawbacks, because of being alone the way I have, it's left me hungry for real contact. And so I think in many ways I'm sort of answering a question I didn't know I was asking about, how do you make contact with people? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a big question to ask, because from what I've been able to see in this world, a lot of people are really afraid to make real contact. I mean, they're not afraid to walk in a restaurant and come up there and say, "Hi, I'm Royce. How are you doing?" I'm talking about a much deeper kind of contact.
Right.
You know, most people are really afraid to come up there and say, "Hey, I'm Roy Solomon. I'm an alcoholic. How are you?" For example.
Well, even being an alcoholic is a kind of personality. It's kind of persona. You know, it's like, you know, what I want to say to people is, "Hi, I'm Robert, and today I'm struggling with something that happened with my father," and to be able to talk about that. I mean, I wouldn't want to talk about that with just anybody because it's not appropriate. But when it's appropriate, I want to be able to talk about what I'm actually thinking about. What, you know, I'll give you a simple example. I watched what's it called, House of Cards on Netflix.
I saw that movie.
And I found myself really churned up about who this guy was. The guy that's sort of anti-hero thing, a fellow named Underwood. And I found myself, I was unable to go to sleep, and it was like really disturbing to me. And so the question I found myself asking is, look, I've seen a lot of movies, not too many of them have kept me from going to sleep. What's going on for me? And in unpacking that, I realized that in many ways I'm kind of like that guy, and I have an instinct in me. He's very manipulative, and I'm certainly not like that. But I have a manipulative streak in me, and it's like I have to be aware of that. And so that, you know, you get to realize, oh, that's why I'm doing this, and that's who I am. I never would have said to myself that I'm manipulative in any way, but I got to kind of, because of this ruminative side of me, I got to kind of explore that and say, what aspect of me is like him that's freaking me out so much, that's making me, you know, that's really gotten to me. And so that I get to, because of who I am and because of this whole set of questions that I like to think about, I get to think about things like that. I get to think about what is it to be a human being, and what is it to, you know, to confront one's own foibles. And, you know, recently, as I'm getting older, I've had a small heart attack. You know, I say to myself, how do we confront death? What is that about, and how do we do that? So all of this becomes, you know, kind of food for churning and food for eating, just to understand, you know, how it is to be a human being and what it is to be a.
Yeah, and oftentimes there's a lot more to it than what we ourselves realize or even bother to think about in many cases.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, when I was young, I didn't think much about spiritual matters or the, you know, inner workings of the consciousness or nothing like that. It wasn't until I was in my mid-30s and I started reading the Bible that spirituality even entered my mind.
Really? Interesting. Yeah, I've been interested in this stuff since I've probably been a teenager, though I didn't quite know what to make of it back then. It's been something that's been part of my life forever. No, keep going. It's fine. It's my own.
It sounds like you got another line there in the background.
Yeah, I definitely have another line, and it's ringing, I may add. But it's fine. We'll let it go.
Okay.
So, that's all right. It'll stop.
Well, what was you going to say?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that our show, we got like 12 minutes remaining in the show. And I always like to, when I get to this point, check with my guests and see if there's anything that they'd like to throw on the table that I didn't ask a question to get them to.
Well, good. I have two things I'd like to do. First, I want to say to you that I really respect what you're about. I think this redneck thing is, frankly, is a charming way to do it. But I think that what you're attempting to do is to bring the world some serious conversations. And I want to say there's way too much hype in our world. There's way too much superficiality. And you're attempting, in your way, to bring something much more important, which is real contact and real considered conversation. And I compliment you for it. And I think there's way too little of it. And so that's so I want you to know that I really respect what you're about.
Well, thank you.
And then I would like to have the privilege of reading something from Enlightenment, Aint What It's Cracked Up to Be. Would that be okay?
Sure.
just to let people hear it a little bit, but also because there's a piece of this that
kind of whet their appetite a little bit.
Yeah, right. This comes in a chapter in which I was really discovering something about myself and about my own psyche and competitiveness, and I realized that in this chapter I describe how I realized that I came to see something about myself only because I was willing to tell myself the real truth. Like I was mentioning to a few minutes ago, seeing my response to this particular film made me realize that I myself am a little manipulative. But in any case, we've been talking about telling the real truth and discovering something. And so here's a little passage from this book about that. And it's less than a page, but it will take me a minute or two to read it, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Okay. Where we're keeping secrets from ourselves, we have to work hard to not see them. We can't just be loose there. We can't possibly play effortlessly. The fear of those very truths and the pain that is hiding from them grips us. It holds us back. All that effort to not know becomes part of us, part of our personalities, and holds us down into the mundane world. Our secrets become our chains. And the vastness, now I call the silence that befell me when I was 24, I call it the vastness because it just feels unending like that. The vastness issues a challenge. Tell the truth. Tell it so completely that there's nothing left to be afraid of. Tell it so thoroughly there's no room for hidden lies. Tell it so completely that you become effortless. Silence beckons ever so slightly, and always towards honesty. It challenges us to let go of every lie we tell ourselves. It calls us to conceal nothing from ourselves, to keep no secrets, and then it beckons some more. Don't give up, it whispers. Don't stop until you're entirely open. No kidding. Don't stop. Jazz in the soul, which is kind of what I was talking about before, has something to do with fluidity. It is being so effortless in everything that we do, in everything that we feel, that we can jam effortlessly from painful to serious to laughter to fear to silence and then back again. There are no walls in such a life, no inner resistances. Having jazz in the soul means you can sink into your own fear and joy and sexiness and vastness and then pop back out again, and all in the key of life. So I wanted to have a chance to read a little bit, and that's kind of summarizing what we've been talking about, you and I.
Yeah, I think it pretty well is too. And I think what you're doing over there in your jazz soul, soul jazz online is really a good thing. I think more people ought to, learn to be more honest. I mean, with honesty about yourself comes a certain amount of freedom. As long as you have anything about you that's secret that anybody finds out about, that's something that could be held over your head at an inopportune moment, right there. And again, there's the other part about how can you ever know if anybody really likes you if they don't see you? I'm all for honesty and, laying it out on the table and that, because I just think it'd make the world a whole lot better place, especially when everybody has reason to trust you.
Yeah. Now, I want to stress here, Royce, that it doesn't mean you should be honest with everybody at all situations. When you get on the bus driver says, "Hey, put your nickel in the bus." Put your dollar in the container there. You don't want to say to them, "Oh, reminds me of my father." It's like the bus driver doesn't want to hear that. That's an inappropriate time. And furthermore, there's some people that would be very manipulative and very harmful to you if you were to tell them real truths about yourself. And to a guy like that or a woman like that, you don't want to talk. You don't want to tell this sort of stuff. But if you choose carefully, and the Soul Jazz online course talks about this, if you choose carefully and choose people that are indeed trustworthy, then I think that there's nothing that's a greater privilege than sharing with somebody who's willing to share back with you and being able to kind of talk honestly and openly. So, yeah, we can't be naive about this. You can't share with anybody anything. But you certainly can share some things with people.
I don't know. for my part, to my knowledge, unless I'm missing something, I pretty much laid everything out there for everybody, on my website, on Facebook, on the show, and my family and friends. I mean, my family, they're all, born again, Bible believing fundamentalist Christians. And, I've actually come out and made a lot of true statements against the church out on my Facebook wall, where I knew they'd be looking for it because they comment on a lot of things I leave over there. And then, I'm like, if you don't like it, I can't help that.
Right. But I bet, though, even though you put stuff out, I bet you that there's more stuff that you're still discovering about who you are and what you actually think.
Oh, yeah, I have no doubt of that in my military mind.
Your military mind.
Oh, you do know I'm an ex-Marine, right?
I do now.
Yeah, okay. I get around. Especially when I weighed 300 pounds, I got around.
You get very around there. So here's what I do want you to tell me just one thing about being a redneck. What does that term mean to you? Because for me, it's sort of the butt of jokes, but I want to know what it is.
I think it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, Robert. I mean, to some people, it means some drunk old, coot out on the lake, just guzzling down beer and fishing and talking mindlessly. Not exactly my interpretation. For me, it's a laid back person that perhaps don't use a lot of couth, don't really particularly care if, people's gonna accept them or reject them just because they ain't got a lot of couth. They're usually known for being basically honest type of people, that would really just bend over backwards to give you the shirt off their back if they thought you needed it. Mm-hmm. Just a good old boy,
That's lovely, yeah. Well, that's good. Does it involve guns? That's one thing that in New York City,
I think that's a stereotype.
Terrifying, but I bet in Texas it's a whole different matter.
I think that's a stereotype. I mean, it is true that you can't knock on a door in Texas, I think, that don't have a gun at it. But I don't think necessarily a redneck has to have a gun.
Mm-hmm. It's really not about that. It's about the kind of laid-back quality.
Yeah, well, for me it is anyway. I just like being a good person with an open personality that, I'm there to help people that want to be helped or that need to be helped. If I'm able to help, I don't mind asking for help when I need help. And, let's just all be one big, world. I mean, we're all a part of the same creation. Why do we have to, delegate, in other words?
I think it's lovely. I think it's great, Bruce. That's great. And I also want to say, I see we're coming up towards the end of our hour here, but I also want to say that I know you've been ill a fair amount recently, and I want you to know that I wish you the best. This is very arduous to go through stuff like this, and I wish you, being able to kind of successfully go through all this.
Well, I want to thank you for being so patient with me through all of this. So it's been very nice of you, and, hopefully we can do some more shows again in the future. I think we did great today.
Well, be careful what you offer, my friend, because I'd love to come back. I love talking to you, and this would be a great show.
Sounds like a winner to me. Matter of fact, we'll talk about that when we go off the air, which we're getting ready to shut her down now. Folks, don't forget to come back and see me. Well, actually, I was going to say this Wednesday the 5th at 7 p.m. Central, but she hurt her back, and unless she gets better, she won't be able to make it. But I do have Scott Roberts and John Ward scheduled to talk about the Exodus reality Wednesday the 9th. And you know what? I'm missing some shows between the 5th and the 9th, so my schedule's incomplete. So check with me this Wednesday. I'll see if she's going to be live on the air. Join us for that show if she is. If not, we'll reschedule it. And I want everybody to, thank everybody for coming and listening. I couldn't have a show without my listeners anymore, and I could have a show without my guests. So you did nothing but listen. You still participated, and I do appreciate it. Tell all your friends about the show. Don't forget to visit Robert at, I got to scroll back down to it now. That just jumped on me.
Well, we could just say Soul Jazz Online.
Soul Jazz Online or Enlightenment, Aint.com. You prefer them to go to Soul Jazz, right?
Well, I think since we've been talking about it on this show, sure.
Okay.
So SoulJazzOnline.com.
And he's probably got a link to the other site there as well. Robert, I'm going to go ahead and shut the show down, and I'll tell you a little something I got going on here. And y'all have a good weekend, everybody. Goodbye.